Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Shipit number 8, the state of Ruby static typing at Shopify. Shipit is our monthly virtual event where we gather Shopify folk to talk about the things they're working on and to take questions from you that are joining us today. Shipit was created as a way to connect with you during this time and directly in this digital world. My name's Anita Clark, and I'm the Senior Managing Editor at Shopify. The engineering blog is my baby, and sometimes I talk on Twitter. Today we're talking about static typing. My guests are part of Shopify's production engineering team, and I dare say some of our Ruby experts. We're taking questions at the end of their presentation, so use the question function in the Q&A, and we'll get to them. And we're going to start, and really excited to welcome you. Thanks for being here, Ufuk and Alex.
Okay, let's get started. Hi, my name is Ufuk Kaiser-Lolo, and I'm joined by
Alexandre Terraza.
And today we'll be talking about the state of Ruby static typing at Shopify. So whenever we start talking about static typing and Ruby, the first question we get is always, why type Ruby? And that's a legitimate question, so we wanted to address that first. At Shopify, we have probably the oldest and the largest Ruby on Rails monolith in the world today. It is really big. We call our monolith core because it stands at the core of our business. It consists of about almost 3 million lines of code. It's got 500,000 lifetime commits. There's almost 40,000 files and over 600,000 methods. And between those methods, there are about 2 million calls that are happening. So this is like a really big scale. But at the same time, our core monolith changes really fast. We have about 1,200 engineers that commit and merge about 400 commits or PRs every day. And from those, we do about 40 deploys every single day. But as developers, we all know that we need quick feedback loops. So we have tests like any good project. Actually, we have almost coming up to 200,000 tests that run on CI, but even the best CI platform takes tens of minutes to run those tests. So that's not really quick feedback. What if you just made a typo and you realize that because your test failed about 20 minutes later in this case, right? That's too long to wait. One solution that we can use to remedy all of this is static typing. We already use static analysis in Ruby. If you ever use Rubocop, for example, you're already using static analysis, right? And we thought we could look into using static typing as well to get faster feedback. The benefits are you get fast feedback, and the reason why you can get fast feedback is because you don't have to load the app, you don't have to run the code, and you can analyze all code paths without writing tests. Because whenever you write tests, you're only thinking about certain situations and you're only testing certain code paths, but that's not always enough. But using static typing, you can actually get feedback about all code paths without writing tests even. Which brings us to Sorbet, right? So if we want to use static typing, then which tool should we use? And the answer is Sorbet, because Sorbet has a lot of qualities about it that make it really appropriate for a company of our scale to use it. First of all, it's fast. And this is the primary goal for the project as they were developing it at Stripe. They want to make sure that it is fast and it stays fast. So Sorbet can actually statically parse, understand, analyze, and type check our large core monolith code base in a matter of seconds. This is really fast. And it's also scalable because once we tested it on our platform and realized that it can parse it and type check it at those speeds, we realized that it can scale to our sizes, but it can also scale down to like small projects as well. One of the biggest benefits it brings is this concept of gradual typing. So gradual typing means you don't have to invest into using types completely. You can just use types in parts of your code base as much as you want or as little as you want. And actually, Sorbet allows you to opt into different strictness levels of type checking on a per file basis. For example, if you say typed ignore, then Sorbet completely ignores that file. It doesn't even parse or process it. Or if you say typed false, then it parses and processes that file, but only does basic validity checks to make sure that you don't have a typo for like class names and whatever. Or if you do type true, then it does stricter checks, like it validates that the methods exist on the types, and the parameters that you supply are the correct number of parameters and with the correct types and everything. So there are different levels of strictness that you can change on a per file basis, and it also gives more gradual typing tools for you to use as well. And using some technique called RBI files, Ruby interface files, it also supports various meta programming idioms, which we need to support because we're a Rails application and Rails uses a lot of the meta programming features in Ruby. And to top all of this off, it's an open source project, so anyone can contribute to it and make it better. So these qualities made Sorbet the ideal tool to use for our purposes. When we started taking a look at doing this static typing adoption, we wanted to approach this as a product because our team is a part of developer acceleration at Shopify. And as a part of developer acceleration, we're responsible for developing products for our internal developer community to use. And typing was going to be one of them. And because it was going to be something that other developers were going to use, we needed to treat it as a product. Our team currently is a 3-person team. It consists of 3 full-time engineers, and we're a part of the Ruby infrastructure team. And various team members that have contributed to our typing efforts. You can see their names and pictures there. Our goals as the typing team have been to drive the adoption, to contribute to Sorbet, to develop our internal tooling that we'll talk about, and to support the users within the company that depend on us to provide these services. The methodology that we use to build this as a product is the build, measure, learn loop that was popularized by Eric Ries in his lean startup or lean product development methodology. So in this methodology, you first build something small, and then you measure its impact, and then you learn from your measurements, and then you decide what you're going to build next, and you continue iterating like this. So you always take small steps, and you learn from your steps, and then you use your learnings to build the next thing. So in that manner, we're going to talk about the things that we built, how we measured the things that we built, and our learnings from it. So what did we build? One of the first things that we built when we started the project, and some of these were actually built even before we started formally, was to build some Rubocop cops to make sure that our code was ready for Sorbet. So we had certain cops that would prevent certain meta programming idioms, like calling const get to get a constant. We prefer to be explicit. When you call const get, for example, it makes it really hard for Sorbet to type check it because it has no idea which type you're accessing. So these cops actually enabled us to enforce styling, to enforce different strictnesses. If you remember, I talked about strictness levels. So we can enforce different levels of strictness in our code base across all of our files using Rubocop rules. And it also allows us to auto-fix some of the things when the auto-fix is available. We later on bundled these cops together as a reusable gem and open sourced it, so you can use it as well in your projects as RuboCop Sorbet. Another problem that we had to solve while we were doing the adoption was around gem RBI generation. So in a nutshell, the problem that we faced, because we were early adopters, Sorbet didn't really have very good tooling when we were doing our adoption. So we had to build some of the tooling ourselves. One of the things that happens is when Sorbet analyzes, type checks your code, it only looks at your code base and it doesn't go and look inside your gem dependencies. And because it doesn't do that, it has no idea what types are being exported from those gems. But when you use those types in your code, Sorbet needs to understand where those types are coming from, what methods they have, what stop constants they might have, what parameters those methods have. So we need to tell Sorbet about those things. The way to do that is to create these Ruby interface files called RBI files. But because our core monolith is so big, we have around 500 gem dependencies in our core monolith, including the transitive ones. So this ended up being something that we had to automate. So we built a tool that would take a gem's code and then generate a light representation from it as an RBI file. And we, again, open sourced this tool. We named it Tapioca. It's a tool for automatic RBI generation from gems. It does runtime reflection and introspection on the gem Ruby code, and it produces a very accurate RBI output. And it's the de facto solution at Shopify. We only use Tapioca for generating gem RBI files within Shopify. We don't use the Sorbet tooling that came later. Because this works better for us. And it's also used in many other companies and many open source projects as well. So for example, if you're a Mac user and you're using Homebrew, well, you have Tapioca in your machine as well, I guess. And you can find the open source project at the link that's on the slide. But then we realized that we also need RBI generation for another purpose. One of the other things that is not statically available to Sorbet is when you use some kind of programming in your code, like when you use a DSL. For example, if you use Rails and if you use active record, when you write belongs to user, that actually generates like about 10 different methods in the background for you at runtime. But those methods are not statically visible when Sorbet looks at the code base. It only sees belongs to user, but it has no idea what that statement, what methods it generates. So we realized that we can actually generate RBI files to tell Sorbet about the methods that would exist at runtime, the methods that we know will be there. So we built that functionality into Tapioca as well. So that made Tapioca into like a Swiss Army knife of RBI generation. So today we have RBI generation for active record associations, action mailer, action controller, almost all DSLs coming from Rails, but also some of the other gems that we use frequently in our code bases. But this is an extensible framework. So you can actually build or write RBI generators that you want in for your own project as well. On this note, I will hand it off to Alex now to talk about how we measured our learnings.
Yes, thank you. So if we look at typing as a product, we also want to measure the market penetration we have with that. And for us, it's how much of Sorbet is now in our code bases at Shopify. So let's see how we did to measure it. What we wanted was actually to track the typing typing coverage we have on all our code bases. For that, we created an internal dashboard called Sorbet Metrics, which goal is to pull every project we have at Shopify, look, oh, is this project using Sorbet? And if it does, to compute a few metrics about that. This dashboard is updated daily. It's available to all developers at Shopify, so they can actually track the progress inside their own project, the project they are working on. The metrics we track, first, it's the amount of projects at Shopify that use Sorbet. So we want to, from 0 project to now, in a matter of 1 year and a half, maybe, to between 60 and 70 projects. The interesting thing is that we don't enforce the use of Sorbet outside of our monoliths. So people are by themselves adding Sorbet to their project because they enjoy it. Inside each project, if it's actually using Sorbet, we compute a few more metrics about this one. And you can see what the dashboard page for our monolith is looking like. The first metric we are looking at is the strictness used in each file. We use this metric in correlation with the circle map on the bottom here. Right now, we are at 80% of our files in the monolith, including tests, using the strictness true or higher. That means that most of the files we check, does the constant exist? Does the method we call exist? And it's important to also look at the map, because if you add more strictnesses in the test file, but no strictness in the files actually run in production by your application, you might have a really high strictness score, but not really strictness where it matters for real. In addition to the strictness, we also look at how many methods we have with the signatures and how many calls we do with methods with signature. Again, you could have a lot of methods with signature, but if you don't really call them from production, you're not enjoying the benefits from Sorbet inside your production code. In addition to all those metrics, we also show the evolution of the metrics over time. So people, when they create pull requests, the day after that, they can see how it moved the needle on their project. We also look at which version I use for Sorbet runtime, for Sorbet static, so we can see if some projects are getting behind. We look at the type checking time Sorbet took to type check the project and see do we have a peak in this time spent, and maybe we can spot a slowdown in Sorbet, some changes that make it slower. You can actually generate the same report for your own application. You can go on our GitHub and look for the Spoon project, and you will get the same report exactly like this for your application. We enabled Sorbet on CI, and it's actually now mandatory for people to merge them their pull requests to get valid type checking. And we are thinking about soon enabling it even to run the tests, so we can have less pressure on continuous integration servers. It's interesting for us to have the data from build kite, so we can see is the time checking step really faster than the selective testing step, and still ensure that we have a faster feedback loop than running the test. While you push your code to CI in a pull request, we will check with the Robocop cups we presented earlier, something about the styling of your signatures, and also ensure that the file strictness are corresponding to our standards. We are currently forbidding for type ignore in our monolith, and I will explain a bit later why. We're requiring at least type false for all the new files added to the project, and also all the old files are at least type false right now. And soon we will be requiring type true. Having it at CI, say every person that wants to push to production to our main branch has to use Sorbet. But we also wanted to see, do people use Sorbet outside of CI by themselves when they are not forced to run it? So we gather the amount of time people run SRBTC or SRB type check, the Sorbet command to run the type checking on their own developer machine. And we have up to 300 times a day people running this command and enjoying the fast feedback loop of Sorbet directly on their developer machine without waiting for CI. So for us, it's super encouraging. People like the feedback loop, run it by themselves, and benefit from the types without seeing that too much as a constraint imposed in CI. All of this will be a bit useless if adding types everywhere was actually making our developers miserable. So we also wanted to track the developer happiness. Questions like, are we doing the right thing? Is it not blocking you? Do you have any idea of what we could be doing next to make it better? So we use surveys twice a year to gauge the happiness of our developers regarding static typing in Ruby and Sorbet more specifically. So we can decide what is the next step we should be taking, where we should be focusing for the next iteration. Some interesting insights is that as we increase typing coverage in our code base, in our monolith, people get more and more caught by Sorbet with an error, a type checking error in their code. Up to 70% right now of the people answering the survey, about 100% every time, say that Sorbet found an error in their code. So it's directly impacting their intuition about static typing. For them, static typing is getting better and better and more useful now than it was at first as we increase typing coverage. As a result, they want more code to be typed with even more strictness. And they also want Sorbet to use in more projects at Shopify, not only the monolith. So it's also super encouraging for us. From all the data and the 1.5 years we spent using Sorbet now, what did we learn with all of this? Let's take a look at this. First, that it's super hard for us to do control experiment directly on the monolith because our code changes too much, too fast, by too many developers at the same time. So even if we introduce a few signatures there and there, it's becoming really hard to see, oh, do we actually have an impact on something happening in production? So we decided to do experiments on smaller scopes. And one interesting for us was Dev or Toolbox or Developer Toolbox that every developer at Shopify is using every day. It's a standalone application that is written in Ruby, runs inside your terminal, and it's really an opinionated code basis because people developing Dev want it to be super fast. For example, they said, okay, no dependency directly inside this project, or the few they have actually directly vendored inside Dev. They also say no to metaprogramming, which is super interesting for us because we try to apply static typing. So all of this made Dev a really interesting experiment for us to bring typing to this code base. It's also used by all the developers at Shopify on different machines, on hundreds of machines, actually. So if something can break in this application, it will in a matter of seconds. So we gather the the errors in production and take a look at, okay, when we add types, do we have a direct impact on those errors? Doing this experiment, we noticed that the more you use typed ignore, the more you are adding to your project something we like to call typing depth. That means that if you ignore a file, Sorbet will actually not look at it. So any constant like the classes you define in this file will not be seen by Sorbet. That means that when you try to type another file using the constant coming from the first one, you will have what Sorbet calls an unresolved constant. For example, here in the bar.rb foo, I'm in the bar.rb file, sorry, I'm trying to reference the foo constant, which is coming from the foo.rb file, which is ignored. So Sorbet didn't see that file, and the foo constant is not defined anywhere for this project. So the more you ignore files, the harder you make it for other developers to type their own file, especially if you ignore the library files or the more library part of your application. That will be reused a lot across the application. So we try to stay away from type ignore. This is why we are forbidding it in the monolith. We actually have over the thousands of files we actually have only 10 files that are ignores, some protobuf definitions for which we generate RBI thanks to Tapioca, and a few test files that use a lot of stubbing and fixtures, things like that we cannot really easily type check with Sorbet right now. Then if you move all the files from your application, and this is what we did with Dev, Sorbet at type false will look, is there syntax error in the file and raise an error if there are, and is there name errors, which is the unresolved constant problem I presented just before. Moving all the application files to type false already bring benefits. For example, it's checking all the constants. So if you made a typo in the name, like this subtle one here, Sorbet will catch it and spit an error. And also, it's interesting because we have tested a lot. We have a lot of tests on our applications, but sometimes we'll test less the error part. You know there is an error and you need to code it to catch it. And somehow you have to respond to this new state of the application. And we realized that we didn't add a lot of tests on all the branches for the errors. So thanks to Typeforce, we were able to catch some errors in those branches that we were not catching with unit test. So when we introduced the Sorbet at Typeforce in the dev project, we actually noticed that we didn't add any new no-name errors in production until after this point, which is super interesting. You just add Typeforce to all your files. You actually just do nothing. You just pass all the files to Sorbet. And if all the constant resolve, you are at Typeforce, and you will never have any no-matter errors later. You don't even need to add signatures at this point. I'm saying this, but if you use metaprogramming a lot, you will still have no-matter errors because Sorbet cannot catch this. One example we had in another project here is this project was using active support and was calling this method that is calling at some point constGet to translate a string to a constant. The problem was that the string was referencing a constant non-existing anymore in the code. This is something we cannot catch with static typing. So if you use a lot of metaprogramming over your Typeforce file, it's not doing a lot of things for you. This is also why we try to keep a bit away from metaprogramming when we can. One difference we noticed between Sorbet and vanilla Ruby is the constant resolution, how it works. In this example, the developer was using the constant version, and actually was not aware that in this project, version could also mean a gem version or semantic range version. In this case, vanilla Ruby was actually resolving the right constant and everything was working, the tests were passing. But Sorbet was raising an error saying, I don't know how to resolve this one, because it needed the fully qualified name exactly for this one because of the conflict. It's actually a difference with vanilla Ruby, but it can be beneficial for the developers. In this case, it's enhancing readability and making the code clearer because you know exactly to which constant you are talking about. And if you were not aware that a second constant was existing, now you do. Then we moved some of the files to type true. And again, at type true, you don't even need signatures yet. At type true, Sorbet will also check that all the methods you call on your application on the files at type true actually exist on the type you are calling them. So we moved all the library files from this application and looked at the no-method errors happening in production. And we've seen that in the files we moved to type true, no more method errors in production after this point, which was super encouraging for us and lead us to think with a lot of intuition that if we increase the strictness in the files, we will get less errors in production, especially the classes of errors that you can have an impact on with static typing, like type errors or argument errors. So what we want to do is to increase the strictness and gather out data about the direct impact of signatures and strictness on the type errors and argument errors. So stay tuned for that. One last learning that we did in this loop was how to provide support for customers, the customers being the Shopify developers using Sorbet. We started using Slack. This is our main communication tool at Shopify. It was interesting for us because we could provide a real-time support, someone who could ask a question and we could answer in a matter of a few seconds, especially when we wanted to unblock them because we don't want people to see Sorbet as something blocking them in their work. So going with Slack first was super interesting to build some knowledge in the company about how to use Sorbet and to react in real time. But one of the problems with Slack is that after a few thousand messages, the messages are deleted. So there is no discoverability about the question already asked in the past. So for us, we were starting to answer again the same question again and again. And even if it was interesting because we could more precisely spot the hard point, the pain point of the developers and try to act on the tooling of Sorbet to make them easier and have less question about it. We also wanted the thing to be more persistent and people could look at all the question already asked and maybe look at if there is already an answer for that problem. So for that, we moved our support to Discourse, which brings the persistence we were missing with Slack. It also permits people to allow people to look for the question they have, maybe answer to some of the other questions they find. And all in one, it's giving more scalability to a project because as we onboard more projects, we have more people asking more questions. And with this course, it's easier that way. So where are we going with all of this? Our first objective is to bring our monolith to 100% type true. So we will have all the benefits from Sorbet, even without adding signatures, even if people are adding signatures by themselves. But we want to reach this 100% adoption in all files and make it the minimum level, the minimal strictness level you can use when you push new files to core. We still have some work required on Sorbet to make it happen. For example, active support concern. We have a few pull requests open right now to get support from Sorbet, and so it understands how to deal with the concern and type check it. We also have a problem right now that we are trying to solve with inclusion requirement. That means when you're creating a helper module and you expect this module to be using something from the class that will include it, there is no way right now in Sorbet to represent this, and you will get errors about the method not existing in the helpers and everything. So we're trying to fix that by adding a new feature in Sorbet that is open right now and we're working on. We also need to do some work on the supporting tooling like Tapioca. For example, in our core, we use a lot of GraphQL, and Sorbet right now cannot understand all the idioms from GraphQL. So we want to generate RBI files for this thing using Tapioca. We also have some problems around active record that we are trying to fix right now by a better usage of generics in RBI generation in Tapioca. All in one, all this work is done to make the adoption of Sorbet inside the Rails code base easier for everyone. Many months ago, we also migrated the monolith to Ruby 2.7. Ruby 2.7 was coming with new syntax and new features, new behavior. So we needed to update Sorbet to make it understand the new things from Ruby 2.7. So we did some work around circular argument references, begin-less ranges, numbered parameter. We also have a forwarding argument syntax support open currently as a pull request in Sorbet, as well as a limited support for pattern matching. All this work to make our code base now that use 2.7 compatible with Sorbet. And Stripe on its end is working on making the keyword argument compatible with a new specification. If you were at RubyConf last week, you've seen a lot of interest for RBS, which are the Ruby 3 type signatures. It's type signatures that will come for core and standard library based on an external file, so signatures in a different language than Ruby in an external file called a .rbs file, a bit like we did in C with the code file and the header file. And this RBS file will contain all the definition like we do in RBI in Sorbet for the files in your project. It's currently supported by STIP and the type profiler that will come with Ruby, but one of the problems we had with the current tooling is that it's too slow for our needs yet. We've seen Sorbet able to analyze our code base in an amount of a few seconds on developer machines, and we still want this feature because a fast feedback loop is really important for us. So we're currently contributing with the Ruby core folks, the folks at Stripe, and also academics, so we can make the RBS specification better for everyone. Also to fit a bit more the needs we have in Rails code bases and to make the tooling faster. One interesting avenue we are working on right now is to make Sorbet compatible with RBS. So we recently open sourced what we call RBS Parser, which is a C++ parser for RBS. And this parser is capable of translating parts of the RBS specification to RBI. You can actually find this project in our organization GitHub. And we integrated this parser. We tried to integrate this parser as an experiment directly inside Sorbet. So the idea is that you feed RBS files to Sorbet. The parser is translating them or what it can do on them on RBI and in RBI files. And then Sorbet read these RBI files and type check your Ruby code with this. That way we could have the better of the two worlds, like with the definition of and the signatures coming from the RBS definitions and the speed of Sorbet on our code base. And I will give back the mic to Fouk for a conclusion.
Thank you. Okay, so what are some of the key takeaways from all of things that we talked about before we get to your questions. So first of all, I think we have found at Shopify that typing is beneficial for Ruby developers as well. Our experience tells us, the developers within the company tell us that they get benefit from typing. So we will continue to invest on types at Shopify. We will increase our internal adoption. We will try to lessen the efforts to adopt Sorbet across our code bases and across the whole community by building more tooling. We will make it easier for Rails code bases to adopt Sorbet as well. And we will also, while doing this, encourage external adoption of the tooling and of Sorbet in general. And so this is like medium-term goals for our team, but we also have like some long-term goals as well. The fact that Sorbet is a static type checker also implies that it's a Ruby parser and it's a Ruby static analyzer. So you can actually use Sorbet to give you more information about your Ruby code base. For example, Sorbet already has an LSP server built inside it, so you can actually use the editor integration. But you can, we can build better tooling on top of Sorbet. So imagine if your cops or your linters or your document generation tools actually worked with a Sorbet backend, then they can like run really fast and they can also scale to the levels that your static typing and static type checking can scale as well. So we want to look into building more tooling on top of Sorbet, and Spoon is actually our first implementation of what tooling on top of Sorbet might look like. And we also, like even longer term, there's also a future where if we can make the Ruby interpreter aware of the types that our methods are accepting or returning, then we can actually use them to make the performance of Ruby runtime code better. Because currently, the Ruby interpreter has no idea what the type of a given method argument is. So it needs to do a lot of type checks to decide, oh, okay, this is an integer, so I can use like the fast integer addition, for example. This is not a string, so I shouldn't be concatenating strings when I see the plus. I need to be doing integer addition. But if the Ruby interpreter knew the type already, if it knew that it was going to be an integer anyway, then you could get rid of all of those checks. Mats is also interested in adding like JIT tooling inside of Ruby going forward. So we think it might also be feasible to add like type information in there. And we want to take a look at this because it's really promising, both for types and for making Ruby faster. So with having said all of that, we hope you also try typing, static typing in your Ruby code bases as well. And we wish you all happy typing as the Ruby infrastructure team at Shopify.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that presentation. We got a lot of questions, so let's get into them. Again, you can ask your questions in the chat, use the question Q&A function and send it to everyone. So let's get started. For somebody starting with Sorbet now, would you recommend Tapioca or the built-in method?
Okay, I think I'll take this. So the built-in method has some advantages right now because it does many things. It generates RBIs for gems, but it also accesses the Sorbet typed repository to get some of the typed gems from there, which Tapioca doesn't do. But it also like loads your application code and tries to like get the hidden definitions from there as well. We feel like it does too much, so we've been cutting down on the features, but that might not work for everyone if you just use Tapioca. So I would recommend that you try Tapioca and see how far you can go. And if it doesn't suit your needs, then you can always fall back to the SRB tooling.
Awesome.
Also, one of the things interesting about SRB is that even Stripe is not using that at the moment. They use internal tooling because they have a code base so complicated, so complex right now. So you might have less support for the tooling coming with Sorbet. Sorry.
That's a good tidbit of knowledge. Okay, our next question is, would you recommend Sorbet or any other static typing solution for that matter for small scale projects?
Yes, definitely. We actually ran the experiments on smaller scopes to see does it have an impact. You have less impact than on really big code bases because you know better the code base. But it's still interesting for you, or at least to catch syntax errors or name errors or no-method errors in a matter of less than 1 second than writing all the tests you need. I'm not saying you shouldn't be writing tests. You should still write tests, but you can catch more errors if you use both test and Sorbet. After that,
we also,
please.
Sorry, no, please finish. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in.
After that, it's also adding about a bit of overhead because you need to write the signatures and everything. But just remember that you're not forced to write signatures to benefit from Sorbet. So just having the constant results is not a high price to pay to benefit from the Sorbet errors that could arise.
And I was just going to say, and we also do it in our open source projects that we build, like for tooling around Sorbet. So both Spoon and Tapioca are highly typed, even though they're doing like a lot of complex Ruby things like introspection and reflection, but we still try to like keep them very strictly typed.
Great, thank you. Have you found, this is our next question, have you found that static types have reduced the amount of tests developers write or changed the kind of tests that developers write?
Did we take a look at that metric, Alex?
So we didn't really look at that right now because we don't have enough coverage and we don't want people to think that, oh, there is Sorbet, so I don't have to write tests. And this is definitely something we don't want because we still want to test the function of this thing. But we've seen people using Sorbet to test things around GraphQL on the parts that are supported. We've seen people using Sorbet to enforce interfaces and things like that. So it can bring more rigor, can be interesting to have it.
Okay, let's go on to our next question is, did we look into Sorbet Rails?
Yes, we did. So actually, a lot of the RBI generators that we have around Rails and Active Record that we have in Tapioca now were initially inspired by the code that became Sorbet Rails. So we actually looked at Sorbet Rails and we looked at adopting it. Unfortunately, our code base is very complex and it depends on really corner case features of Active Record, and the typing that Sorbet Rails generates for Active Record models in particular was too strict for us, and we had no way of turning it down. So we instead ended up building something similar, unfortunately.
Okay, next question. Is there a way to mark particular modules or directories for Sorbet enforcement?
Yes, you can go on a per file basis by adding a magic comment at the top of the file and stating the strictness you want Sorbet to have. So you can actually say, Sorbet, don't even read this file if you don't want it to type check it, or you can go to false to just check some classes of errors. True after that, strict and strong. My advice will be to avoid ignoring too much files, because after that you will have a hard time typing the files remaining because of the constant resolution problem.
Cool.
Also, sorry, for the module,
sorry,
in the configuration for different directories, in the configuration file of Sorbet, you can precise which path should be ignored and which path should be type checked. So you can also play with both these things, the per file basis and the by directory, by path basis.
Great, thanks. Okay, next question. Our organization recently discovered less than half the engineers are using Sorbet editor integration. Editor integrations are critical to actualizing the instant feedback loop possible by Sorbet. How has Shopify encouraged engineers to use editor integrations? And is Shopify interested in investing in those editor integrations? Here at Gusto, we would love to be interested in partnering in this. That's the extra like nice CTA at the end of that one. Good Gusto.
I can take this one. Yes, we're very much interested, but so far we haven't actually pushed any of our engineers or actively pushed any of our engineers to use the editor integration. I know some people in the organization have already discovered and are already like using the editor integration, but we haven't. And the reason being that our code base is like in our monolith is too big, and it takes the feedback loop isn't that instant when you use the editor integration. So we're still waiting for it to be a little bit more performant before we start suggesting it actively to the engineers, but we would love to cooperate on making that better.
Awesome. Okay, next question. I found it hard to set up the LSP integration. Any tips on setting it up with VS Code?
Maybe I can take this as well. I find it really interesting that LSP, which is actually language server protocol, I guess. LSP is a protocol developed by Microsoft for Visual Studio Code. But interestingly, Visual Studio Code is the only editor that needs a special extension for every LSP protocol implementation. So for that reason, LSP mode is actually built into Sorbet executable. So you just type SRB -- LSP, and you can just like run a Sorbet in LSP mode. And it's way easier to integrate it with other editors that have like generic LSP plugins. But unfortunately, you need you either need to build your own Visual Studio Code extension, or we need to wait for the Visual Studio Code extension that is being built by Stripe that they will ultimately open source, but it's not there yet.
Cool. Okay, we got 12 minutes left. Oh, sorry, did you want to say something, Alex?
Yeah, sorry. One of my advice would be look at the path you use if you have some kind of integration working, because it's the most occurring problem we have, the root path and the dir path.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to say we have 12 minutes left, so if you got questions, put them in the chat, and we're going to move on to the next question. Do we use the full feature set of Sorbet, things like exhaustiveness, checking, etc.?
Yes, most of the features in Sorbet, we use them at somewhere in the monolith. Be reminded that it's super big, this monolith, so a lot of people are enjoying different features. Exhaustiveness checking is interesting when you use enumerations. We have a few of our people actually thriving to get strict, type strict level or higher, even strong sometimes. So they benefit from these features. For the people in type force and type true, it's a bit less.
Also, I just want to remind the audience that our team, composed of 3 full-time engineers, isn't responsible for actually implementing the code for this thing. We're responsible for building the tooling so that our developers can actually use these features of Sorbet. We know some teams rely heavily on typing and use all of these features in their part of the code base. Some teams do not use typing at all in their part of the code base. So there's like a mix because it's like a really large code base, like Alex said.
Great, thanks for that. Next question. I understand the feedback loop pre-CI, but how does having Sorbet in your dev cycle affect CI runs, if at all? Or is the productivity for devs the main improvement?
I will try to answer this one. I just wanted to be displayed right now because I forgot the start.
Sorry, I thought I said that one a bit fast too.
I would guess that the dev cycle is about all the impact it has on productivity. And one interesting thing that we've seen by looking at the metrics is that people enjoy having this feedback loop before, but we also seen an impact that is harder to quantify right now, but it's the after. What about the signatures sitting in your code? Some interesting impact is the readability. Like you look at the signatures and right now you know what is the method doing, well, what this method is actually taking as a parameter, what it's returning. So you have less documentation to write, and the documentation you write it through the signatures that is staying evergreen and up to date with the code, even if there is a change. And if you break the contract with the signature, Sorbet will tell you. So you have this documentation that is free coming with the signature. It's helping developers that works on the code base. When you have multiple developers working together, they don't have to tell each other what the method is accepting or not. So you have less documentation to write. But it's also interesting when you add new people to the project, like we do on the monolith every day, you have less time to spend with them to explain them what the code is doing, because the signatures are helping with the understanding of the code. So that's one of the impacts you have. And you also have impacts after that when, for example, you try to do big refactorings. Then the name errors raised by Sorbet are super useful because, oh, I forgot to rename this constant in this file and everything. So we've seen a bit of overhead adding the types manually in the code, but at some point you're gaining from this, from what you pay in the first place. Maybe Ufuk will want to explain.
And the basic reason for having type checking on CI as well is to make sure that we don't regress on type checking, right? Like just because some developer didn't type check locally before they pushed, shouldn't mean that other people will get type checking errors now. So like that's really the main benefit of running the type checking in CI. And like Alex said in the presentation, we want to soon make it mandatory to run tests so that we can save testing time. If your code isn't type checking, it won't be merged anyway.
Cool, thank you. Next question. Do you have any internal gems written with strict or strongly typed? Oh, sorry, let me do this over again. Do you have any internal gems with handwritten strict/strongly typed RBI files? If so, have you run into issues with the SRB tooling?
We have a few internal gems and a few teams that have been working on those internal gems that have gone like all the way to type strict. They wanted to build their gems using Sorbet from day one, and they wanted nothing less than type strict, where type strict means that you need to put a signature on top of all of your methods, and if you don't have a signature on any of your methods, then Sorbet will complain about it. So we have some gems that do that, but as far as the SRB tooling, I'm not sure because we don't really use the SRB tooling that much within Shopify. But Tapioca is able to actually look into your gem and identify the signatures that are associated with the methods. And it can also generate RBI files with signatures inside of them as well. So we get the benefit of the teams actually building using types, and the consumers of the library also getting the benefit of the types through the RBI files as well.
Great,
and
thanks.
Also, if you try
sorry.
If you try to get the type strict everywhere, but you have a few problems with the tooling at some point, you can also use what they call at Stripe the escape hatches. It's just disabling the type checking just for one file or for one method, just for one signature. So it can be useful if you are stuck at this point.
Okay, our next question is, how do you use Sorbet along with GraphQL, which has its own type system and has lazy evaluated resolvers?
Our team actually hasn't yet. We did look into marrying the GraphQL types with the Sorbet types. We tried to do like some translation between those two types, but then we didn't make too much of a headway. So Harry is right. There's like a impedance mismatch there. But I know that there's a team within Shopify that have changed the way they write GraphQL to make sure that it plays nice with Sorbet. And like one of the people who work on that team has also like published that as a blog post explaining how they use GraphQL and Sorbet together. So I can share that blog post link in the chat if you want, and that should give like more insight. But we are also looking at making that like easier across teams as well. So if you have any ideas, please reach out to us.
Cool. Actually, I see a question here that I'm going to kind of take over from like my friends in the background that are helping me with the questions. Just to follow up with this one, because they're asking specifically for clarification around when we say we don't use SRB tooling, what do we mean exactly? Is SRBTC used at all? And if not, how do you gain the benefits of Sorbet?
Yeah, I think I might have said that slightly wrong. We don't use SRB RBI tooling, where all the things that SRB tooling does with respect to RBIs we don't use, but obviously for type checking we do like SRBTC and like all the things that come with it. But yeah, I should have said we don't use the SRB RBI tooling or SRB init, which calls into that as well. Basically, we just use the type checking feature coming from SRB.
Cool, thank you for that. Okay, our next question, we got 3 minutes left. There's a lot of other questions here that we will address and like share with you all. I will have emails and all kinds of things going out to you for all these updates. So our last question will be, what's the best approach to introduce Sorbet into an existing monolith with a team of 8+ engineers working on it?
I think I can answer this one. First, let's move all the files to type force, which is the default level, the strictness level on your files. So you will have a lot of work resolving the constant. Hopefully, if you run Tapioca before, you will have all the constant coming from the gems and from your DSLs if you use Rails resolved through RBIs, and all the methods coming from those gems also resolving, so you can even try to move to type true. One of the things you have to take care of is staying up to date with the version of Sorbet, so maybe something with Dependabot. So because Sorbet is still in beta and you have a lot of new features coming on every day at most. So you have to take care that you keep Sorbet up to date, because if you wait too long, you will have a backlog of things to fix to be compatible with the next version, which can be blocking. So just move to type false, ignore the files that you cannot type check right now. Use Tapioca to generate the RBIs that gives you all the constant. Then after that, look at which are the files that generate the most errors in production, if you can trace them. And just move those files to higher strictness. At some point, we also notice that developers just do that by themselves because they like Sorbet, the static typing and the signatures and everything. So also you can count on the more natural way of Sorbet being adopted in your code base. Just give the example, make the tooling really easy to use, and after that, the teams will pick up after you.
Yeah, and just to add on to that point, one thing we noticed that sometimes happens on teams is when they want to adopt Sorbet, they want to go like all the way and they want to go crazy and add types everywhere. But that's actually like probably the wrong way to start. We would advise, like Alex said, to start slowly and then gain confidence, and then to like putting more types into your code base as time progresses. And if you want to gamify it in a small team, we have found, and it even worked on me, there was like a part of Tapioca that was like undertyped. Once Alex built the Spoon tooling with those dashboard and metrics, I looked at the part of Tapioca that was like undertyped, and I said, it shouldn't be like this. So like I spent half a day to make sure the types were strict because it felt good. So if you really want to gamify your engineers, you just build those metrics and the reports and make them see their progress.
A fun fact about that, we've seen a few developers, actually a few teams using the circle map to show, oh, with this pull request, see how much green there is in our code base right now. So super useful to visualize the amount of typing you have in the code base.
Oh, great. This was so much fun. There's so many more questions left, but we will get to them and share them with you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Ufuk, Alex, thank you for joining us and sharing all your knowledge about Sorbet. I hope it's helped a lot of people who are wondering how to get started and had all those great questions to share with us. There's going to be a video of this event posted afterwards. You will all get an email when it goes up on the engineering blog. You can also keep an eye on our Twitter or sign up for our mailing list to get instant updates. We're hiring. Take a look at Shopify Engineering. You pretty much can work anywhere now since we're digital by default. Finally, thank you all for spending this hour with us. We're touched by how many of you joined us and all the questions, and I hope you've got a lot out of it. With the email about the video, we have a survey. Please fill it out. We want to know how we can make this better. We want to know what topics you want to see, and any good comments will be welcome. Speaking of upcoming events, we have December 16th is the next Shipit, and it's going to have members of our storefront renderer team who will be talking about their performance tips. So if you're wondering, if you read the blog post, if not, get on shopify.engineering and search storefront renderer, it'll come up, or just scroll down the front page. You can find out about what they did there, and you can ask them questions about your performance issues, and hopefully they can give you some advice that will help you out. Thank you again for joining us. Have a great afternoon. You guys have a great night, because I know it's Europe and late at night, and it's just noon-ish, well, 2 now for us Eastern Standard Time folks. Have a good day. Thanks.
Happy typing, everyone.
Bye.